It's been 100 days since the general election, and I think it's safe to say that the news hasn't been particularly quiet. We've seen a Labour landslide, unlike anything we've seen since 1997, when Tony Blair won his first term. And we've recently had the autumn budget, which is, I think, a breath of fresh air for a lot of faces after all the Conservative budgets over the past 15 years. And I'm joined today by a Labour MP who contributes his seat to the majority, Steve Yemm. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Ewan. It's great to be here with you, and I hope you're well as well.
Thank you so much for coming down. It really means a lot to us.
Super. It's my pleasure.
It's the first time you've been elected. I suppose the question to start off with is, how do you feel you've gotten on as an MP so far?
Well, it's like taking on any new job, right? There's a degree of unfamiliarity. I've never been in politics, and so we're all learning. I am at the point now where I feel pretty comfortable. I'm really enjoying my time in Parliament. I spend 4 days a week down there, and then I'm back in Mansfield, back in the local area where I live. And, you know, we're now speaking in the chamber on a regular basis. Made a couple of speeches, some interventions, some questions this week. So we feel like we're settling in, and I use the term we. I have a very good team of people supporting me as well. So it's not just about what I do down in Parliament to represent the people of Mansfield. It's what we're all doing as a team.
Talking down in Parliament, what's that like? Because I can imagine it's quite daunting.
You know, you could imagine it's quite daunting, and I imagined it would be quite daunting, but the reality for me is that I'm actually very comfortable in the chamber, right from the very first questions that I asked and from the very first speeches that I made in there. I feel very much at home. I don't have any kind of nerves or anxiety about speaking in the House of Commons, just a fair degree of confidence about that. And I think that will grow over time. I mean, we're in very early days right now. Indeed, yeah.
So it's still very early. Yeah. So the way this interview is going to work is we're going to have 4 sections.
Sure.
First, we're going to touch on the election, so both locally and nationally. Then we're going to move on to sort of your life as an MP, how it's been, how you interact, how you get voices down in Parliament. Then we're going to touch on the budget a little bit. We've got a few questions that I think a lot of households are going to be asking. Yeah. Whether they're going to be better off, what's it like, and we'll round things up with talking about local issues and Labour Party policy. So I think we'll jump straight into it.
Let's go for it.
So, as I've said, a Labour landslide. Were people excited to vote Labour? Because I think back in '97, people were excited to vote Tony Blair. Do you think they were excited this time around, or do you think they were just voting against the Conservatives? Well,
I think, you know, what I found talking to voters is that they knew that the country was in a very difficult position. They knew that whoever was to win the election would have some really difficult problems to deal with. I think they also knew that the Conservative government had kind of run its course, really, and they couldn't imagine another 5 years with the Tories. I think that understanding the difficulties the country faced meant that the voters understand that we're going to have a period of time when we're really fixing the foundations of the country and putting things back on the straight and narrow, back onto an even keel. I think in some respects that's kind of not as exciting. Everyone knows it needs to happen. It's only when you do those things that you can do more interesting things in the future. And so I think naturally that kind of lends itself to less of a sense of excitement, but actually more a sense of responsibility, that actually we need to make long-term decisions about fixing the position that the country's in. Maybe it's a bit less sexy and a bit less exciting, but I think what the election showed is that voters do understand and recognise that we need to do that, and it's vitally important for us.
Some change. I think in Mansfield, I mean, it was one of the most difficult seats to predict. Your predecessor, Ben Bradley, had a really strong hold on Mansfield, and I can imagine it was a very difficult opponent to campaign against and win against. Did you feel confident going into the election that you'd win, or did you have any doubt that you think Mansfield might stay blue?
Well, I don't take anything for granted in life, and I certainly don't take the opinions of Mansfield voters for granted. And so, look, I don't make predictions or run commentary. I'm a political campaigner. And so my entire focus in the election was about how do we have those conversations with Mansfield voters. And we had tens of thousands on the doorsteps and all over the place, right across the district, right across Mansfield and Warsop. And, for me, it was really about recognising that in the recent past, Labour had made mistakes, that we had to hear about that from Mansfield voters, and we had to respond to it. And I had to have those conversations with those thousands and thousands of people on the doorstep, looking at them in the eye, just like we're doing today, and be able to win over their confidence. So, no, I never took that for granted. I never made predictions. I didn't really think that much about the outcome. I focused more on the process of having the conversations and winning the trust of people in Mansfield.
I can imagine it must have been a very difficult process to go through, campaigning on all those doorsteps. What was the sort of typical conversation that you'd have to have, especially with, let's say, somebody who's an undecided voter, who's maybe not prepared to vote Labour, but are not looking to vote Conservatives? What would a conversation look like to that sort of voter?
Sure. Well, there's a lot to that, and all of those conversations are different, right? We're all individuals, and we have, different concerns and so forth. But to me, it was never hard work. I enjoyed those conversations tremendously. I'm actually never happier than knocking on doors and speaking to voters and hearing about what are their concerns, what do they want to get done. And I heard a lot during the election about the issues that people face in their lives, the challenges that the country faces, why they have maybe switched from voting Labour in the past to voting Conservative or other parties in 2019. And, for me, the task was to hear that, to listen to it, to put my point of view, to give that reassurance. And, I was very focused on doing that in the election. It wasn't difficult for me because I derived a lot of, fulfilment and satisfaction, but actually just straightforward, just like having conversations with people.
And obviously you're Mansfield born and bred here.
Sure.
It's, I suppose, speaking with those people, you've got that extra connection with them, is that essentially they're the people that you've grown up with. And
to some extent, I think, maybe because I was born here, I was born in, for anybody viewing this who doesn't know, I was born in Reneth, into a mining family, lived here all my life, went to school here at Brunts. Of course I grew up with people here, but I think it does, if you have a local person standing for Parliament and getting elected as it happened, I think I feel it's important to have somebody who understands the local area. I think that helped me quite a lot. And, I think on top of that, I was very clear with Mansfield people that I intended to be the full-time Member of Parliament. I really don't agree with politicians taking jobs outside of Parliament. This is my full-time job now, and it will remain so as long as I'm the Member of Parliament.
Well, let's bring that back to the election, and I'm just going to bring up some statistics.
Sure.
Particularly on the very populist emergence of Reform UK. I think this election, whilst it's a Labour landslide, I don't think you can excuse the fact that Reform did surprisingly well. So in Mansfield, 39.1% of the vote was for Labour. That's what got you elected. 30.6% was for the Conservatives, and 22.8% was for Reform UK. Now, looking at those figures, how much of an impact did Reform have by pulling away votes from the Conservatives and actually splitting the Tory vote in Mansfield? How much of that did you think brought you to being elected?
Sure. Well, again, I mean, I welcome the question, Ewan, but we're on to commentary again, really. I'm not a commentator or a journalist, but my reflection is, when I had those conversations on the doorstep with people who were thinking of voting Reform, many of them were not Conservative voters. If there was not a Reform candidate, they would not have necessarily voted Conservative. They might have voted Labour or Liberal or Green. And actually, you know, voters have all sorts of motivations. I think one of the mistakes it's easy to make is to assume that if you take Reform out of the equation, they're all going to vote Conservative. I don't really buy that at all. But there's a bit of commentary for you, which I'm kind of, you know, getting into a little there. But I don't think. Look, part of my ethos is I never take voters for granted. I never think, you know, oh, they're over there in that column. If only we do this, they'll switch. There seemed to be a lot of talk about that in the election campaign in Mansfield. I think I never said stuff like that. Some of my opponents did. I think that's a fundamental error to take any voter for granted in that way.
Now, nationally, voter turnout was at 59.7%,
Sure.
which means that around 4 in 10 people thought that it wasn't their responsibility to vote, or rather that they didn't want to vote.
Yeah.
That's been the lowest, actually, since the 2001 election.
Yep.
Turnout in Mansfield was 56%, so it was a little bit lower than that, but it was pretty much along the same lines. Does that figure worry you, considering how many people participate in politics now?
It does. It does worry me. I want to see a lot more people getting interested enough at least to cast their vote on polling day. But look, that's my responsibility. It's incumbent on people like me to show in 4 or 5 years, whenever the next election comes, that we delivered on stuff, that we changed people's lives for the better, that the country is going in a better direction. And coming back to your first question, giving people that belief that voting does change things, that not all politicians are making the same offer, that there are choices that will be made in the country, and you can take a look at those choices and have an impact as an individual by voting on polling day. I think it's really important that we, provide, that degree of motivation to voters that gets them interested enough to go out and cast their vote. So look, all of us who are in elected politicians have a responsibility there to have, again, back to those conversations, understanding what are the views of the voters and giving them that reason to get out on polling day.
So do you think the government should do more measures to bring up voter turnout, or do you think rather the positive impact is what's going to increase voter turnout?
I think it's, my own view is it's more the latter, that actually, one of the issues in politics is that we've had a period of government where promises were made and not delivered. Right. I think it is really important for this new government to look at what did we say we'd do and ensuring that we do that and being able to demonstrate that when the next election comes and people have that opportunity to cast their vote again. So I understand that people are cynical about politics. And look, I'll give you one example. In 2019 at the general election, our former MP and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson stood up in Mansfield and said, we're going to do something on mine workers' pension. And they failed to do so over 5 years of the Parliament. We made the commitment to do something about it, and we've done something about it within 100 days. I think that's the demonstration on delivery that we need to show. This is a very important issue, this particular one, for Mansfield people. But, that's what politicians need to demonstrate. We said we're going to do this, and we've done it, rather than 5 years later it failed to materialise.
Now, what you've touched on there is, I assume you're speaking about the budget. And we've got some questions on the mine workers pension.
Yeah.
We'll get into we'll touch on that a little bit later. But it's
around that issue of trust, right? I think that issue of trust. Will these people actually, with the best will in the world, do they intend to do the things that they say they're going to do? I understand when people see that failure to deliver, that they feel like it's not worth casting their vote. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon people like me to kind of level with the country and with voters here in Mansfield to say, there's very, very difficult times we're living in. Actually, there are some really tough decisions that we'll have to make. But here's, some light at the end of the tunnel when we get through this. But the important thing is, we said we were going to do these things, and, it's fair that voters measure us on this in 4 or 5 years' time.
And you think that lack of trust is what made people vote Labour this time?
No, I think, to come back to your question, I think it's that lack of trust that leads to low turnout, right? I don't think it necessarily leads them to vote one way or another, but people will not vote unless they think it makes a difference. Right. And if politicians don't do what they said they were going to do, it's not making that difference that they signed up to when they cast their vote.
And I suppose making a difference, every vote making a difference, there's that idea that obviously with our electoral system,
yep.
the winning candidate in each constituency gets everything, and the votes casted to any other candidate isn't properly represented, or it doesn't actually make a difference because they've lost.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair? Do you think that sort of system of voting is fair in the country, or that, like you said, every vote counts?
Well, what I think is there are pros and cons to every type of voting system. And look, one of the things that we've seen over the last few years, particularly if you look back to the Truss budget and so forth, is a lot of challenges around stability. Look, in the last Parliament, we had 3 Prime Ministers and 5 Chancellors with no election whatsoever. I think that that's more of a challenge. How do we get to stable government where we have confidence, investors have confidence to invest in the economy? I think part of the challenge around changing the electoral system is you don't have governments elected. If you look at a lot of European countries where government's elected in a different way, it often takes months and months and months to put together a coalition that falls apart in 12 months.
Right.
And you don't get that kind of stability of 4 years of having stable government over a parliament. Now, I've put the case there for one approach. You kind of put the case in a way of saying, well, is this a fair outcome? Yeah. Look, I mean, I see the pros and cons there. I think if we were going to change the voting system, that is a big decision for the country. I think there'd need to be a referendum on that. I think that would be quite proper.
Similar to when Nick Clegg with the referendum of changing that voting system.
Yes, and of course, you're referring to that referendum in 2011, some years ago now, but it was overwhelmingly rejected at that time.
Does that sort of illustrate the idea that maybe people are satisfied with this, is that they do actually see the pros outweighing the cons?
Well, some people do. I mean, some people think that it's right that we elect governments in that way, and other people disagree with it. And, that debate will be ongoing, I'm sure. But look, when it came to a referendum on the question, voters were overwhelmingly in favour of keeping the current system. And so I do think that is somewhat a once-in-a-generation question. Despite what I might think personally, I voted yes to change the voting system in 2011, and I was on record as doing so at the time. And I'm very open-minded on these questions around electoral reform. Like many questions in politics, it's not black and white. There's a lot of kind of arguments on one side and the other.
So what we'll do now is we'll move on to life as an MP.
Sure.
When you've been elected.
Yep.
Now that you're in properly. Is everything shaping up how you expected it to be working as an MP, or is there anything different as you imagined going into the role?
It's pretty hard work, I must say. I mean, I am down in London 4 days of the week.
Wow.
When Parliament is sitting. They're pretty long days. I tend to make Fridays my constituency day when I visit businesses and schools and so forth. Saturday is usually a day for knocking on doors, and Sunday is usually a day for getting prepared
so it is a
for the
full
week
week.
ahead. So, I do take this very seriously as a full-time job. But look, no complaints from me. It's an absolute privilege to represent the people of Mansfield in Parliament, and I enjoy it tremendously. And look, I'm trying to speak as often as I can in Parliament, talking about Mansfield and the challenges that we face here. When I'm not in the chamber speaking, I'm meeting with ministers in order to take forward some of the things that are important to people here. And then, on Fridays and Saturdays, I'm listening to what people have got to say. We're going back to that election campaign and the importance of what I take from that in terms of listening to Mansfield people. So, I fill up my week. This is quite new to me still. I've never been a politician. Maybe I'm bringing a somewhat different approach to this. I hope the people of Mansfield appreciate it. I'm certainly working as hard as I can and doing my best to give it all that we can.
So let's talk about what does a usual working day look like? Because you've mentioned about the week, but during the day, how from start to finish, what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So days in Parliament are very different from days in the constituency. Typical day in Parliament is I don't have a lot else to do while I'm in London, right? So I'll tend to get into the office about 7 o'clock. And I'll do some work on email and stuff like that. And then I'll maybe get some breakfast. I'll meet with my team when they get in. And, we'll kind of plan the day ahead. The meetings that I have a lot of organisations, constituents and so forth will come in and we'll have scheduled meetings through the day. The chamber tends to open around about 11 o'clock, runs through until 7 p.m. So it's kind of an 8-hour working day in the chamber. I'll be in there for quite a bit of that time because, look, what you do is you go down to the Speaker's office, you say, I want to speak in the debate today. And, you'll often be waiting. People will have seen, if they've watched Parliament, there's this thing about bobbing up and down and waiting to get called and so on. So, thinking about this week, right, so we had a general debate on Monday on remembrance and veterans. I got called to speak in that debate about the particular situation in Mansfield. Tuesday, we had a lot of ministerial questions. I was able to get 2 questions in on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we had the budget. And I was asked if I'd speak on the first day of the budget debate. The budget is debated for 5 days in Parliament. I was asked if I'd speak on the first day. I was able to get called and spoke.
How rare is that?
Well, the rarity of this, I was speaking to other members and they said their expectations is that they will get 5 opportunities to speak in the chamber per year.
Wow.
I've spoken twice this week. I've spoken 5
got 3
times.
left.
Spoken 5 times in the last 3 weeks, 5 times, right? But I regard, Dennis Skinner always said this, that, he regarded being in Parliament a bit like working down the pit in a way that you put in a shift. It's an 8-hour day. You turn up there every day and you say what you've got to say. And I have a very similar approach to Dennis on this. in that, it's very kind of workmanlike for me, right? So I have those conversations with people in Mansfield. I hear what they have to say. I'm there to represent them as that full-time member of Parliament, and I go there to do a day's work. I get to my desk at 7. We have those few hours of preparation. We've got the chamber. We might do stuff after that. But look, while I'm down in London, my family are up here in Mansfield. I don't have a lot else that I want to do in London. So, I tend to put everything I can into those days. And, when I'm back up here in Mansfield, the days are very different.
Right.
My Friday constituency day usually starts, because we have meetings through the day, we'll usually do like a meeting with businesses.
Right.
For instance, last Friday I went to meet with Mansfield Garage Doors, hear about, what they're doing, the challenges they face. I then might go and meet with a charity,
Right.
hear about what they're seeing in the district. I like to go to schools. Best part of my job is go to schools and getting to meet the students and the children and getting to speak to them. I went to a primary school where I spoke at the assembly about what I do in Parliament, what I'm there to do. And I took questions from the kids, which are just...
Not like these questions.
They were much harder than your questions, Ewan. Much harder. They were things like, why did you want to do this? Why did you want to go to Parliament? How did you get to do that? Do you know Keir Starmer? Do you know the Prime Minister? Through to wanting to ask me questions. This was a primary school, right, about the things that are important to them. That is really one of the best parts of this job and one of the things that I find most enjoyable. And then, I tend to do my surgeries. I meet constituents on a Friday afternoon, and we'll maybe do 3 hours of those meetings. Right. All sorts of things. So we'll generally do those from like maybe 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. And we're moving it right around the constituency. So I'll be in Warsop one Friday, Forest Town the next. We're doing, I think it's Ladybrook tomorrow. We're going to...
Covering all bases.
We're trying to go to where people are. And, one of the other things that I said in the election is I want to do things where people can turn up and have a cup of tea with me, a bit like we're doing today, and they can ask questions, but we'll have other people there. And, for instance, one of the things that we found is that there are issues with antisocial behaviour, crime in certain parts of the district. We want to go and have those meetings with constituents together with police officers so we can really get to understand what are the issues and what needs to happen.
And address them properly.
To solve them. I really need to be involved in that. As the Member of Parliament, I meet with the police on a regular basis. Those questions, as a Mansfield resident, are really important to me because I live in this community. Anything that affects other people living in this community affects me, affects my family members as well. So, I have that kind of vested interest in engaging in all of this. So, they are from Parliament to my constituency day. We're doing, it's a Thursday now. Tomorrow we're going to do all of that. Friday we're out. Saturday we're out all morning and then all afternoon, knocking on people's doors and having those conversations on the doorstep. So, they are, I have to say, they are full days, but I'm enjoying it tremendously.
Well, you mentioned going into schools, and I think, obviously, everyone's going to be engaged in politics at the minute. Obviously, you've got the budget and you've just had the election. So I can imagine there's some people who are looking at MPs, looking at politicians and thinking, that's what I aspire to be. That's something I'd want to go into. What would your advice be for those sort of people who maybe want to work in the civil service or, like yourself, become an MP?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first piece of advice I'd give them is really establish your why. Why do you want to do this? What is it that you want to believe in, that you believe in? And for me, I have held the political views that I hold now since I was a teenager. They're very deeply held. And so establish your why and take that why and make it big, right? Understand what's your motivation, right? Because this is not really a job like any other. You know, it's a job where you have to have a big understanding of what's your purpose in doing this. And so, you know, think about that first. You know, think about where that can take you as your first step. You know, that is a more important question than thinking about, well, you know, how do you kind of progress into a certain kind of career path, right? Find your motivation and your you know, the reason.
I suppose everything else will come with that.
Yeah, I think,
the drive for it.
you know, I mean, those are the kind of things that you need to do in any career path. And look, I had a career in science and in business before this. But despite that, I've always been involved in political campaigning, usually for other people rather than myself. But, you know, this is not something that I suddenly decided, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic to be a member of Parliament? You know, actually, all of my life, I've believed in the things that I believe in. And, you know, I decided to stand on this occasion, not for any career pathway at all, but because a lot of people here in Mansfield said to me, we think you should do this.
So let's turn to the budget now.
Sure.
Recently been announced, and I think a lot of families are going to be having questions on it. It was a very technical budget, a lot of sort of classic Labour budget.
Sure.
I'm going to ask a fairly straightforward question. What does this budget mean for people in Mansfield?
Well, the thing is, Ewan, when I stood for election, I set out priorities for Mansfield after all those conversations that I had. And I think, well, look, the Chancellor came to Mansfield. She heard this herself. And what I saw is that the budget really helps me to deliver on the pledges that I made to people in Mansfield. And so if you think about getting the NHS back on its feet, cutting waiting times, dentistry and so forth, crime and antisocial behaviour, we announced more police and more money for police on the streets, in particular in respect of, you know, our town centre and so forth. Fixing our roads. So more money announced for roads and potholes in the budget yesterday. Over £1 billion on new housing. So, you know, relief on housing, whether you're a buyer or you rent. Big changes there in terms of housing supply. And then finally, stability. You know, stability in the public finances, in the economy, getting away from the chaos that we've had for the last 14 years. Those were the things that people in Mansfield were saying to me at the election. They're the things that we're determined that we'll deliver on for people in Mansfield. And I think we made a really good start on that yesterday.
Wow. I was reading into it, and there was some direct things that I know that will impact Mansfield.
Sure.
For example, they mentioned the mine workers' pension. How far is those decisions going to be impacting Mansfield? Because I know they're quite personal here.
Well, look, they're personal here in Mansfield. They're personal for me. A lot of my family, you know, were miners. But, you know, I've campaigned for this for some time. We made a commitment to doing this. You know, I've done everything I can to get it over the line quickly. You know, I've written to ministers. I've met with the ministers who had to sign off on this to get it done. So I've been pushing very hard. And, you know, I'm delighted that the Chancellor announced yesterday that she's signed over the reserve fund so that members and beneficiaries of the scheme will benefit from this. You know, it's up to the trustees how they use that money. It's about £1.5 billion. But what I think this will mean is a 32% increase in the pension for former mine workers and their families. It's a huge thing, and we want to go further. There are other things that we want to do for mining families. The next thing is, how do we look at profit sharing in the investment for the scheme? How do we then move on for people who worked in the industry but were not members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, but were in the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, the BCSSS,
It's a mouthful.
right? So they face the same issues about injustice, and my next fight is, now we've got the MPS over the line, and there's some more work to do on that, of course, but the next thing I want to do is move on to those other people who face this injustice. And by the way, there are a lot of other people, so, it's not just mine workers. There are a lot of other people where we need to fight for justice in Mansfield. There's the WASPy women, right? We announced yesterday that despite the Tories not funding this, we are putting the money together, not just for Horizon and the postmasters and the people who need compensating. We're going to fully fund that. But the infected blood scandal, right? And then we've got the nuclear test veterans as well that we need to fight for. And then we've got all the people who have suffered from medical negligence claims, unfunded by the Tories, but we need to fight for those people in our community as well. And so there are a lot of injustices here that people come to me and they talk to me and my office about. I'm determined to get into Parliament and fight for all of those people. So, we had a great victory for mine workers this week at the budget, but we don't rest upon that. There's a lot further that we need to go, and a lot of other people where I need to put my shoulder to the wheel and fight for justice for them as well.
Now, it's funny you mention that, because all of this funding, the money has to come somewhere.
Indeed.
And the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced a fair hike in tax rises. And I think a lot of people can look onto it and see that the clear message is that the tax rises are going to be put on businesses or families who are particularly wealthier than others. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's fair that we tax those with the broader shoulders to fund these sort of promises?
Well, look, I think you used the phrase earlier that this is a real Labour budget. And, if we believe in anything, it's that those who are most able to contribute should do so. We're in a difficult situation in the country. We committed at the election that we would not raise taxes for working people. I think it is really important that this budget not only stabilises the economy and public finances, it not only delivers for our public services, and in particular the National Health Service and our schools, but it also protects working people from tax rises as well. They are the three important elements of this budget, and I would find it difficult to defend the budget if that were not the case.
There is an investigation going on, and you mentioned it, that Labour promised that they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. And there's the national insurance contributions going up, which is set to rise from 13.8% to 15%.
Yep.
And that is on employers only, so employees won't be paying a burden of that.
Indeed.
But a lot of small businesses will have to pay that. And a lot of sentiment from the Tories during the election was that Labour would raise taxes.
Sure.
And you said on working people, right?
Indeed.
And now Labour's turned around, delivered this budget, found all this money in tax rises, and a lot of people are saying that small businesses are having to suffer the brunt of the national insurance contributions rises. Do you think the electorate who voted Labour in was misled and to believe that the things that have happened wouldn't happen?
No, I don't think so at all. And look, we were really clear that we would not raise income tax or VAT or national insurance contributions for people at work. Businesses are not people, right? We've asked business to pay more, I think that that is the right thing. And we have taken really significant steps to protect small businesses specifically. So in the new rules that we announced at the budget, many small businesses will actually pay less in national insurance contributions. And actually, we're really asking larger businesses to pay their share and, not to put that burden on working people. I think it is the fair thing to do at this point. And, I think it is really important that we do that, not just to plug the gap in the public finances, but to make sure that we're able to meet our commitments, particularly on the NHS, but across public services. Look, our schools are crumbling. We've got teacher shortages. We need to fix our roads. We have no capacity in our prisons. We can go on and on and on at the things that the last government let to go to ruin that we need to fix. And look, I am not making any apology about we will fix the problems. We will stabilise the economy and the public finances, and we will not put that burden on working people. I think they're the choices that we're making at this budget. I think they are the right choices for the country.
Let's bring it back. Let's talk about minimum wages. You touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
But so the minimum wages paid by employers are set to rise by April. Yeah. The national living wage for employees aged 21 and over is going to rise from $11.44 an hour to $12.21 an hour. Aged 18, 19, 20 from £8.60 to £10, the biggest rise here.
Sure.
And those aged 16 or 17 to rise from £6.40 an hour to £7.55. I think the message here is that young workers, they're getting the benefit of this budget. And whilst it's good that these minimum wages are going up, the fact that national insurance contributions are also having to go up, is that going to threaten businesses into not actually employing staff?
Well, I don't think it should. And look, I heard all of this back in 1997 when we introduced the minimum wage, that it would destroy jobs. And look, that did not happen. I don't think there is any excuse for paying young people less than they're contributing. And I think the equalisation that we brought forward in this budget to pay young people increases in the minimum wage is absolutely the right thing to do. I think, look, I'm a very strong believer that in this country, intergenerational equity has gone in the wrong direction, and as a country, we need to put that right. And so I am completely supportive of the changes that we've made in terms of the minimum wage, the national living wage in this budget. We've been through a cost of living crisis. I think it's the right thing that we're providing that 7% increase in the living wage for thousands of households across Mansfield, and that we're providing that degree of equity for younger workers and apprentices in this budget in terms of their pay. I understand that they are significant, but again, they're the choices that we're making, and I think it is the right thing to do.
Well, let's talk about more general, moving on from the budget, talking about sort of local issues and Labour Party policy that ultimately is affected by the budget. I mean, it's what is funded by.
Yep.
I think a very topical situation was the winter fuel repayments. And it's the idea that cutting back the winter fuel repayments, installing a means-tested system, that number of winter fuel repayments are going to fall from expected 11.4 million to 1.5 million this winter. Was this a right move from the Prime Minister, or how strongly do you defend that position?
It's the right thing to do. And look, for me, it's unconscionable that we have pensioner households that have more than £1 million in assets are paid a winter fuel allowance when families with children are equally struggling. more so struggling to heat their houses through the winter, but receive no winter fuel allowance. In fact, many of them are going out to work to pay taxes to pay for that winter fuel allowance. And we know from the government's own wealth and assets survey, 2 years old now, but we're just about to get the new figures, that almost 1/3 of pensioner households have assets more than £1 million. It's more than half have assets of more than £500,000. And look, what I see, fuel poverty in my constituency in Mansfield, when you look at families with young children, the rate of fuel poverty is double that for pensioners. And yet these people, younger people and families, have been excluded from this debate. It's the reason why I made the case to the Chancellor that we should be looking at expanding the system of cold weather payments, which is available to all sorts of households. And I've made a number of suggestions on how we might reform that to make it more available. I think it would help all sorts of households, particularly if we have a cold winter. Now, look, having said all of that, we are protecting the least well-off pensioner households. Those who are eligible for pension credit will continue to get the winter fuel allowance. I think that's also the right thing to do. And look, we're trying to get more and more pensioners onto pension credit, so we expand the number of people, pensioner households, who are continuing to receive winter fuel allowance. I think that this is the right thing to do. Again, it is, a question about intergenerational equity. And look, we are committed to the triple lock for pensions. It means that pensioners have seen quite properly big increases in the state pension and will continue to do so throughout the remains of the Parliament. So I'm really looking for solutions on fuel poverty that help every household. I think cold weather payments are one of them. I'm also interested in bringing forward the idea of a social tariff. So for less well-off households, there is a lower tariff. That's not something that could be done immediately. It's not something that will have an impact this winter. And that's the very reason that I made the argument on cold weather payments. Now, that argument has not been accepted by government yet, but I will continue to make that case as we get further into the winter.
I think it's fair that the way that they bring across this decision is that everything's cut back.
There's a lot I could say about this, Yemm, but look, I'm listening to what Mansfield people have to say on this topic. A lot of people have been in touch with me. There are many people who don't agree with the government. But I have to say there are many people who do agree, and they're the pensioners who get in touch with me and say, when I get my winter fuel allowance, I give it to my grandchildren. I bought an iPad with it, or I put it into my holiday fund, right? Now, at the same time, there are a lot of pensioners who absolutely rely on that for heating their homes. And I understand fully, and I've looked into great detail into the effects that cold temperatures in indoor rooms can have on the health of pensioners, but also, or people of all age groups. So I understand the disquiet and alarm at this. It's why I've been making those arguments to government. And look, it's not just about, we need to put money into the bank accounts and into the pockets of people who are struggling in fuel poverty, whether they're pensioners or families or other types of household. We need to think about questions like the social tariff, and we need to think about insulation. Look, we have the worst and most drafty housing stock in Europe. The government has announced a very wide-ranging programme to insulate our houses, and particularly those who are in the lower bands. I think that is really important. But again, it's not going to be done immediately. It's going to be done over the next few years. It's more of a long-term solution. And look, in the long term, we also need to get bills down. It's why we launched GB Energy. It's why we're moving to carbon-free electricity generation. The reason that we've got such high prices is we've allowed ourselves to become completely dependent on gas that we import from overseas. Look, we have a long-term plan to move away from that, which will lower bills, give us stability, and mean that we're not dependent on energy from overseas, and that we create a lot of high-quality jobs in the process as well. So there's a lot of things that the government is doing that will offer solutions in the long term. I'm trying to find some short-term solutions, and I'm advocating for that to government, and I'll continue to do that. I didn't, the things that I set out in my letter to the Chancellor ahead of the budget, saying these are the things that are important to me and to Mansfield, we got all of them apart from that one. Right. So I'm going to continue to press on that one, not just with the Treasury, but with the Department of Work and Pensions as well. Because, look, they're important questions for me. I hear what people in Mansfield are saying, and I want to do everything that I can possibly do to help them.
So what we'll do, we'll talk about some of the other topics, because I think that's a lot of budget.
Sure.
A lot of budget talk.
Go for it. Yeah.
One of the things that I think people watching this interview is going to have in the back of their heads is road maintenance.
Sure.
Because it's a serious issue, and I think it's safe to say that the state of roads, sort of left by the outgoing Conservative governments, is a real problem both nationally and locally. How are you going to tackle road maintenance here?
Yeah. Well, look, the thing is, they're not outgoing, right? They're still in power as far as Mansfield roads are concerned. So our Highways Authority is Nottinghamshire County Council.
Right.
It's run by the Conservatives. The leader of the council is my predecessor, Councillor Bradley. They still are responsible for fixing our roads in Mansfield. And so, we need to make sure that, I've made the argument for more money for fixing roads. We made an announcement in the budget yesterday that we're putting more money to this. I need to go then to the Roads Minister and make sure that we get our fair share here in Nottinghamshire. I then need to make sure that they're doing a good job in terms of using that money properly to repair our roads. Do I think it's fair?
Yeah.
What, to them or to
the council has that influence still on road?
Well, yeah, because they were elected almost 4 years ago to do that job. But look, if the people of Mansfield don't think they're doing a good job on the roads, and I'm one of them, but I'm a little bit biased on the question, when it comes to the elections next May, they should not be re-electing those Conservative councillors who have failed to deliver on roads in Mansfield. They should think about who is better placed to give them, a better approach on road maintenance here. So getting the money from central government is one part of this, right? But at the end of the day, that money is going to go to the Highways Authority, run by the Conservatives and Councillor Bradley. And, Mansfield voters will have a chance to make up their minds next May about, whether they have a good record or they prefer someone else to be doing that job.
Another concern is the state of the NHS.
Sure.
I think it's those things. It's road maintenance, the NHS, and social behaviour. Those are the main big three.
Yep.
Now, you ran on a party pledge to reform the NHS, but also on a personal pledge, especially working with people, especially down at Kingsmill Hospital, that you would be able to reform the National Health Service. Can you offer some comfort to those people sitting at home who may be thinking whether they might not be able to get adequate healthcare at the minute?
Yeah. Well, look, there are all sorts of challenges, and if you've been with a close family member or a friend in A&E and you've seen how long you've had to wait, or you've not been able to get in to see a GP, for your child or yourself, or, as I hear very frequently from people in Mansfield, you can't register with an NHS dentist. These are terrible positions to be in. And look, my view is, I'm a Bevanite, right? I believe that we should have a health service that's available and free, and you should not be able to have healthcare that's about how wealthy you are, right? And so for me, the NHS and the support for the NHS and those principles is really fundamental. Every time we have a Conservative government, they run it down because they don't believe it. They voted against it. And so every time we have to come in and repair it, look, it's top of our list. We might be just 100 days in, but yesterday at the budget, we announced record investment, another 25 billion plus for the health service. But let me say, this is not just about money, it's about reform of the NHS, about making it work better, about making it fit for the digital age as well. And so when I talk to people who work in the NHS, including members of my own family, they say, things get done on paper, we use pagers, information gets faxed around, there's no interoperability of records and so forth. Look, there is so much we need to do to boost productivity so that when taxpayers' money is going into the NHS, they can have a greater degree of comfort that will provide healthcare outcomes effectively. And so, we have a reform agenda which is mainly about investment, not just investment in IT systems around the latest diagnostics and approaches as well. Because look, my view is people of Mansfield deserve the very best healthcare that we can provide to them. And I am determined that's not just NHS dentistry, but we get primary care back on its feet and GPs, that people are not having to wait 1 and 2 years for surgery, that we're getting that down to weeks rather than months and years. So these things are really important for me. I believe that they're really important for the people of Mansfield. I think we made a really strong down payment on fixing this in the budget. We'll need to go further, but this is really number one priority for me.
Similar question, but on a different topic,
Sure.
is of antisocial behaviour. And it's
Yeah.
something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, especially going into town centres and socialising around. Is the main concern is that they will be bothered by antisocial behaviour. And it makes a lot of residents concerned about their safety. So the question I've got to you is, what's your message to those people who may be concerned about going out in public in the town centres because of these sort of groups of people?
Well, look, my message is, I hear what you're saying, and I share the concern because it's my town centre as well. These are my streets here. My family live here. I have all of those concerns. I think that they're really important and I take them seriously. And look, at a budget and government level, we recognise that. We're putting more money into policing. We're doing some reform around procurement in the police force to save money as well. Ultimately, we need more police on the streets solving these problems. We're committed to that. And look, my relationship with the police force here, I meet with them on a regular basis. I'm hearing what residents have to say about the issues in their neighbourhoods. We're having that dialogue with the police. We're actually now promoting the idea of multi-agency meetings in Mansfield so we can get the police and my office together with relevant agencies to solve those problems around antisocial behaviour, low-level crime, and quite frankly, sometimes alarming levels of crime that I hear about and come into my office. I'm really determined that my constituents should not have to live with those kind of issues, And I would say to them, if you're facing those kind of challenges, let me know about it, because we're really determined with other agencies to really take action to find solutions to those kind of problems. And, there are many individual situations which are very, very difficult. I want to do everything I can do with my office to assist in resolving those situations. And then, at the kind of more macro level, it is about how do we get the funding in to put more police on the streets. And, we're having that discussion with the police about, what would more officers mean in Mansfield? How would you deploy them? What does more money and resources look like?
I suppose that's the worry, is that the logistics of it, because it's all well and great to get more funding, but to translate that funding into actual progress is what concerns a lot of people, I think.
Well, the two things go together. It's about, you have the cash, but then there's the execution piece of it. And I would say to people, report crime. It makes a big difference, right? So you have crime on your street, let the police know. Use Crime Stoppers, because the way that the police work is that if they get reports of crime in a particular area, that's where they put the resources. So we know that some of the areas that face the highest degree of challenge over antisocial behaviour, the level of reported antisocial behaviour is some of the lowest in the district. So there's sometimes some of the challenges around reporting and intelligence and so forth.
What do you think makes people not want to report crime? I mean, it's a very silly question because it should be second nature to report crime.
Well, I think sometimes, Ewan, it's because they don't realise that they should.
Right.
They don't realise that the police, it's so important to the police that they hear about this, or that, it's important in directing police resources. So sometimes people just don't know that, right. Or they don't know how to. So, there's some communication there. And, we, as an office, we're going to be saying to people very frequently, this is how you do it, you should do it. But I think it's some of those, they don't realise always the impact that has to report it or how they should go about doing it.
Well, rounding up with the interview, I think we've got a final question. I think it might be the most important one of the entire set list.
Indeed,
but do you think Mansfield Town's going to beat Wrexham on the weekend?
Well, I certainly hope so. Look, the team's really important. I've spent this interview saying I don't make predictions or commentary and so forth. But I'll be rooting for Mansfield, of course, and hoping and expecting that we're going to get a win on Saturday. So fingers crossed, of course. Yeah.
I think that's everything.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
So that was Steve Yemm on our first debut interview on For the Record Journalism. If you liked our content, if you liked the interview, please follow us on all social media, and we've got much more interviews coming soon, and I look forward to seeing you next time.